What basically we were kind of confronted with a couple of years ago is, and there was one basic statement we were embracing, and that was, we're a small church of limited resources. We, as Byron kind of alluded to earlier, we can't do everything, and we certainly won't be able to do even the few things well if we're trying to do everything. So basically, with that tenet, and also the idea that with limited resources comes limited amount of change or a limited amount of influence that you can do in any one given area, what can we do to begin to figure out what's the best way to not only see who we are as a people right now, where we are, where we think we want to go, not necessarily in the 5-year plan, although that's important too, but even in the 6-month plan or the 1-year plan. How would you begin to figure that out? If you're gathering up all your congregants and saying, well, where do you want to go? Well, everybody's going to have a different opinion as to where they want to go. And from a leadership perspective, we've got to essentially make some decisions and kind of at least assess what we think we not only are good at, but as I said earlier, it's about faith, where we think we want to, launch out and kind of have God meet us. So Byron and I kind of began this dialogue. It started out as a dialogue of a schematic of little pieces of yellow stickies on his wall, and trying to kind of like figure out all the things that our church is currently doing, and we would kind of like slot them all around and all that kind of stuff. Eventually I kind of got clever and put this all into an Excel spreadsheet, not so much so that it would be electronic, but it would allow us greater flexibility, and from there it kind of took off and kind of started to have a life of its own. And this is kind of just a very small collapsed version, for the sake of this presentation and slide, of what we've basically got. It basically deals with 3 main areas, or maybe 3 main goal areas. On the left side, that would be essentially our underlying mission statement, that we are disciples that are making disciples that are also being discipled to make new disciples. There's, as Byron said earlier about structure, there's organizations and there's organisms. And when you're living in an organism, that doesn't mean that it's devoid of structure, but it's a little bit more free-flowing. It's a little bit more, things don't kind of like stop and start. And this model is not necessarily to define boundaries as much as to recognize essentially periods, overlapping areas that would effectively now kind of like lend you into some sort of understanding of a progression. With that progression in mind, we tried to allow for the various phases that we were recognizing, not only in our current church situation, but also in the way in which we'd want to engage with the world. And that is, you're going to have stages of people that you encounter in a pre-Christian world, a pre-God. They don't even know about God. And what do you say, and what do you do, and how do you engage at that stage? You also have a receptive seeker who now, okay, maybe they're getting some ideas about that, but they're still like, tell me more. That's truly still a stage of discipleship. When the Great Commission went out and said, go and make disciples, we've reinterpreted that to mean go and make Christians, go and make evangelized Christians. When in fact, a good many of the people that Jesus engaged were people that he just engaged at both the pre-Christian and receptive seeker level, and you never hear about them again. He kind of sends them on their way, maybe possibly to think about these thoughts on their own and return at some later time. But then you finally get to the point of Christ believer. And so this may be the first time that we even acknowledge that there's some sense that they're now acknowledging Christ in their life. And so with that, we now have essentially an active sense of assimilation into either the local assembly or at least some sort of Christian gathering. You then, of course, from a sense of wanting to allow them to grow, you're going to introduce things along the lines of Christian discipleship and maturity along those lines, as well as to develop a sense of Christian advocacy. And how are you saying that the commitment that you've made, the affiliations that you've made in association with all the fellowships around, this is kind of a fun little group to hang out, but now it's about Christ's kingdom and what are we doing to advance that. So now we have to start working on how do we articulate that. So then that kind of leads us down to the final areas of being truly called to be fishers of men and ultimately to become shepherds of that next set of ministries. So that has its own goals of ministry connections, and of course then to effectively allow for the kingdom in its totality to be kind of affected, not just our local assembly. So all these process action levels that we're showing on the right-hand side are summations of all the various kinds of levels that we would go through. If you go to the next slide. I essentially opened up one of those levels just so that you would then see that under the process action level of engagement, one simple thing could be just conversation. Well, what would that conversation look like within the local church, beyond the local church, and what would the various community steps and or various encounter groups or whatever. The other thing that we were trying to do with this is not just to try and identify all those various process actions and levels. We were also then trying to take an assessment of our ministry resources. As I said earlier, we're looking very much to try and come up with a way in which we could make the limited amount of resources that we have effective. And so, if in fact we started looking at, well, what do we have to offer in these particular areas? Do we have anything to offer in these particular areas? If there was blanks, well, then obviously there were blanks that we either decide we need to fill in now because we think that this is a focus, or say, no, there are things that we are better suited to doing, and so we should now essentially refocus all of our efforts because we have our limited time frames and resources to affect these things. Let's concentrate on these more particular areas. That doesn't mean that we abandon all the other areas exclusively, say, sorry, we're not going to evangelize for the next 3 years because it's not on our mission plan. We're not going to say that, as I said, because it's more of an organic kind of thing. There's still going to be points along the thing where we have to essentially be available at any given for any given area, but our concentration is going to be on one area versus another area. And this tool then effectively gave us the capability to not only now say, okay, well, here are all the various life groups that we're going to train, sermon series, whatever courses of study. This is a way in which we're going to be able to kind of start plugging some of these holes, and then now go back, as Byron alluded to earlier, and say, now that we've executed, let's go back and do our assessment. How were we against the execution? Did we essentially meet even the small short-term goals that we're really hoping to achieve? And if not, why not? Were there things that we just weren't really prepped to do correctly? This would essentially now begin to kind of address those particular areas.
So this is a major tool for us. We started out within the team that Scott and I are both on, but it is now spread to the entire church, or at least all of the leadership team, and we're looking to help them to learn how to use it for their planning processes, ongoing ministry, and assessment of their ministries. Another area is dedicated seasons for extended concentration. I mentioned prayer and fasting, something that we're in fact wrapping up starting tomorrow and next week and over the next 2 weeks just before Christmas is a series on called The Emotional Healthy Church, which is a book written by Peter Scazzaro, who happens to be someone that Scott knows personally. And these are some of the areas that book covers, looking beneath the surface of our lives to really discover the things that we don't know about ourselves, or that we know about ourselves that we keep from other people, or that people know about us that we don't even see. Breaking the power of the past, living in brokenness and vulnerability, receiving the gift of limits, and then ultimately helping us become more like Jesus, who himself became man so that we could understand and connect with God. And our role is to do the same, to enter other people's world, holding on to who we are, but entering into the lives and the world of other people through incarnation, so that we can minister to people. So we feel this has been a very valuable series. A lot has been invested in it. We do more than just preaching. We have most of our groups and our adult teaching classes on Sunday morning and Wednesday evening is aligned around this, as well as one small group that a number of people are participating in. So we've seen a lot of good dialogue, a lot of good exchange, a lot of good transparency come out as a result of this, and people are beginning to really connect with it. And so we have big hopes.